All right, Amy and I are joined by blood brother Carl Weixler. Carl, always a pleasure. Thanks for doing this. Good to see you.
Great to see you all, and thank you for asking.
Yeah, of course. Well, it's been an interesting, newsworthy time, of course, and we want to talk to you about current events. We also want to make sure that our listeners and the greater community have the appropriate context for this discussion and your points of view, Carl. So, could you start by giving us some background on 30 years ago? It's the 30th anniversary. How did HFA come into existence? Why did that happen? And what did you have to do with all that?
Well, thank you again for asking me to be a part of this. I am a little bit concerned at where things are going and where they've been. Um, I joined HFA in 99, and HFA started in 94. So I was 5 years into it, and I think I was at the third symposium that they had, or fourth. But HFA was originally started by the Committee of 10,000, also known as COT. And the Committee of 10,000 was an organization that was formed by Jonathan Wadley and a number of others, Corey Dubin, and a number of others that were very, well, pissed off. They were pissed off that a lot of us got infected, and they were upset that things weren't being done to protect the consumer. And the Committee of 10,000 also worked with the Peer Association. And it was the Peer Association and COT, along with some other individuals, that formed HFA. And the reason it was formed was because NHF was dropping the ball and was telling us to continue to use our factor. It was a time that was very tumultuous in that those of us who were taking product were trying to be very careful of it. And there were also people that would not take their factor just to make sure that they didn't get infected. HFA wound up being called a federation for a reason, because it was a federation of member organizations, not chapters. Now, when I was president of HFA back in the 2000s, we had a board of about 38 member organizations. So there was about 40 people on the board, and that was a trick to wield as president to make sure that I moderated and kept the board calls and board meetings on track. Now, granted, I understand that HFA has reduced their size of their board, and I can understand because there's a lot of expense of flying everybody in for symposium and having a meeting. But the thing that really made a difference to me is that each member organization had a voice. They had one member plus an alternate that sat on the board, and each organization had a voice and was listened to. Unfortunately, the board kept growing to the size where it was a little bit difficult, and depending on the president or the chairman of the board as to whether the meetings were efficient or not. HFA for the longest time would not accept manufacturers' money. In fact, we didn't take manufacturers' money until close to 2000 and I believe 7. So it was a long time that HFA relied on home care companies and private donors. HFA decided to stay that way for the longest time until we couldn't afford to not take manufacturers' money, and that's when the change came into play. Now, things are a little bit different now in that they've changed the board to be very small, and I can understand that. It's about 15 people, I believe, and I can understand that's a much easier group to deal with. But the problem with it is, for me, is that the member organization lost their vote. So in has relabeled themselves as NBDF, and HFA has done something that I think is very concerning. When you let go a lot of staff all of a sudden, and you say that there's budget deficits of, astronomical amounts, it's kind of funny. The budget when I was president was about $300,000 for the year. And we did Blood Brotherhood, Blood Sisterhood, Dads in Action, and Helping Hands, all on 300,000 plus having a symposium. And granted, times were different. It was a little bit cheaper to do things back then, but at economies of scale, we did more with less than any other organization I think I've ever been a part of. Now, HFA has always been the consumer-friendly family reunion type of meetings. And what I also liked was that HFA took and ran with an idea that two blood brothers had of getting all of us blood brothers together, and Susan Swindle ran with it and got the CDC grant for Blood Brotherhood. So a lot of kudos to Susan Swindle. Now, with what has happened, has got me a little bit concerned that they have put on hold the Blood Brotherhood and Blood Sisterhood. And that makes me want to ask the question, what does on hold mean? Is that like in the old days when you had tech support that you could call and actually get somebody that helped you, but you stayed on terminal hold until, somebody picked up the phone? Are we on terminal hold right now? Are we just waiting? What's the deal? So my concern is that HFA may have already made a critical error and may not be viable to come back, but I don't want to believe that. I believe that HFA is viable, that it can come back, that it can be stronger than it was before, but only under one condition, and that is to take off merging with NBDF off the table. And the only reason I say that is because HFA should never be a part of NBDF.
If we take that off the table, Carl, and based on what you heard from Dan, what do you think is HFA's best path to a sustainable, community-oriented future, given where it is right now?
One, I would like to look at the budget, because it's all based on money right now. I mean, all the employee cuts were based on money, and taking services off of the table is all based on money. I'd like to see where the budget is. And I do understand that the revenue stream is drying up. I do understand that it's gotten harder to make the revenue stream consistent. That being said, I think they need to look outside of the hemophilia community manufacturers and look to other streams that a lot of other organizations will use. I guess my concern is with Dan and what I listened to on your podcast. And unfortunately for Dan, one of his emails got leaked. And in his email that I read, it was kind of discouraging to read the email. It made me feel, in one part, he was quoting statistics of how many people with hemophilia and von Willebrand's there are, and how many people that are over the age of 50 with hemophilia. And I felt very dismissed in that HFA would rather focus on kids, because the statistic he gave was something like the majority of people with hemophilia are between the ages of 2 and 10. And that means that they're more focused on kids, not on adults. And if it weren't for us adults, we wouldn't be in the place we're in with recombinant products, with sub-Q products, and with gene therapy.
So, Carl, if you could advise Dan and the current board on some things they could do across the rest of this year to help make sure community members such as yourself, because I'm sure you're not alone from feeling dismissed or reduced in some way by some of the language and some of what's going on. How could HFA best communicate to you and people like you that we are your organization too? Perhaps we made a misstep. We're listening. We want to work with you. What would you advise given your experience with the organization and the fact that you are a lived experienced expert?
Well, that's kind of a tough question because there are so many variables that come into play. My first advice would be to reinstate blood brotherhood and blood sisterhood, because that's where the community's heart really is. And two of the programs that I believe have made probably the biggest impact in the lives of community members because of just the exchange that happens between brothers and sisters. Now, granted, I would love to see Dads in Action come back as well. And then there's also a moms group that we had at one point that I would love to see to come back. But I think going back to the basics, like Helping Hands, I'm a little concerned that Helping Hands has been put on hold, because my understanding is there was an endowment that was given for Helping Hands that could not be touched. And I don't know, has that endowment been touched? Why is Helping Hands on hold if there is an endowment? So I have, he said something in his email about transparency. And I think that the transparency has not been there. I think it's gotten kind of overshadowed with innuendo and rumors, and there's not been a forthcoming with how the organization has been run. An annual report would be great to see, but that hasn't happened.
Carl, are you planning to attend symposium?
I am trying to make it to where I can come up for at least part of it. Unfortunately, I don't have a lot of vacation time. I no longer work in industry, so I work a real job.
So symposium isn't a work event for you anymore, huh?
No, it's not, unfortunately. I am going to try to make it, but I don't know right now if I am or not.
Well, I certainly, and I think I speak for Amy as well, appreciate the candor and level setting that you provide in this discussion. And I also appreciate that you acknowledged, as we have as well, that Dan and the current organization aren't necessarily in an enviable spot. It's not necessary. It's not as though things were going swimmingly before they made decisions that they made. So I think I appreciate that you underscored that too in your comments, in fairness to them.
Yeah, it's not an easy job. I mean, I've been there and done that. And when Susan and I were the pair, because Susan was executive director when I was president, and she had really a tough job. And so did I to some degree, because there were some things that happened during HFA's early years that wound up landing in my lap that I had to fix. And you're not going to please everybody all the time, but you can keep the basics in front of you.
That's really well said. And I hope you're able to make it to symposium. If so, I hope that we'll have a chance to see you there in person. Amy, is there anything that you'd like to ask or share with Carl before we let him go?
Carl, I just appreciate your candor, and alongside with you, we're really hopeful for this next season in HFA's life cycle. I know it is a hot button topic because it has been so important to so many lives. And so that just needs to be restated, that it is such an important organization in this community.
Any final thoughts from you, Carl?
Don't want to put her on the spot, but I think that the organization that has come to the top of the crop is the Coalition for Hemophilia B. I think that they have done a wonderful job at listening to the community, to finding ways to really support the community. And even though it's just for us hemophilia Bs, I think that they've done a really good job, and HFA could take a lesson from its own history and from the coalition.
Well, thank you, Carl. Hope to see you soon.